City Administrator Tony Tolstead to introduce our guest.
Yes, what we have, I'm sorry, can I have this real quick? Thanks. Your Honor, one of the things that we do every so often is to do a little bit of training for our Robert's Rules of Order. It helps us how we run a particular meeting. We've had the opportunity now to have John Wood provide a training to our Planning Commission, and now again for the city. You have books in front of you that help serve as a reference that we've purchased for you. And with that, Your Honor, because there is not a quorum here presently, we could just let John go directly into his presentation and work through it. John, if you would.
Sure. Everybody has, I think, a copy of the handout.
Yes.
You're welcome to take some notes as well. And I have something to pass out just because I think it's kind of fun to look at it. This is the Rel Roberts Rules of Order. You guys got the abbreviated version quite a bit. I think somewhere along the way in that rotating slide deck, it did a little history of Robert's Rules of Order. He was a military guy during the Civil War. He wrote Robert's Rules of Order. It's been revised many times. This is the 11th edition. I read that the 12th edition is coming out next year. And there's some organization that kind of carries on his legacy, and it's actually his family that continues doing it. So they own Robert's Rules. And the language, even in the 11th edition, is that old type language. So it's interesting to read. You can see it's a giant book. And we're going to do a simplified version, and I think you saw the objectives going through that, kind of the very fundamentals of Robert's Rules of Order that we want to talk about. The mayor's already heard this presentation, so thank you to you too. And Eric has heard it, and I think the Planning Commission heard it. So there you go. And Tony's heard it too. That's right. So it'll be fun. I was asked to do the Planning Commission, as Tony mentioned last month. Kind of my schedule's the problem. There we go. If we need to stop, I probably do.
Yeah.
Welcome. That's right. I would call the September 10th, 2019 work session meeting of the Riverton City Council to order at 6:02. Would you be willing to do this Pledge of Allegiance? Councilman Bailey will do the Pledge of Allegiance, and Councilman Larson, would you give us the invocation?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our eternal Heavenly Father, we are thankful for the opportunity to serve the city of Riverton. Thankful for the moisture. Thankful for the opportunity to learn and to conduct ourselves accordingly. Father, we would ask that Thou would bless us with insight, understanding, that we might gain from this training. We humbly ask this in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. The city clerk, please conduct roll call.
Yes, Your Honor. Councilman Mike Bailey.
Here.
Councilwoman Rebecca Schatze.
Here.
Councilman Kyle Larson.
Here.
Mayor Richard Gard.
Here. The chair would entertain a motion to, glad to have you, Tim. The chair would entertain a motion to excuse Councilman Rhoda and Councilwoman Borders.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilwoman Schatz and a second by Councilman Bailey. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion passed. I declare a quorum present. The chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
A motion by Councilman Bailey and a second by Councilwoman Schatz. Any discussion? Seeing none, All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. And now, John, we're back to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. I'm honored to be the only person on the agenda, so that'll be. So I was mentioning that last month we did the planning commission. Tonight we're doing the city council, of course. And then really due to my schedule, we have to wait another month before we get to the airport board. And so those dates are up there and my contact information. The objective, as we just talked about, is the basic principles of Robert's Rules of Order. They can go on and on and on. And you know, I heard Tony mentioning that he's an expert in Robert Rules of Order back in his day of winning some awards in college on it. You can get certified in Robert's Rules of Order at several levels. There's all sorts of interesting things. But fundamentally, I think there's just some really basic things that any small board can run Robert's Rules of Order very effectively. And it doesn't, you don't have to get certified in lots of detailed stuff to do that. So the topics tonight are the principles that we talked about. But I want to talk about this notion of bylaws, superior laws, and the purpose of Robert's Rules of Order. A little bit about meetings, motions and amendments. We'll spend a lot of time talking about voting, just because I think it's kind of interesting to me. I mentioned, and Tony can't answer this question when we get to it, and neither can anybody else that was here. You want me to stand closer? Is that,
Yes.
sorry. Oh, because of the TV?
Yes.
I'm on TV, okay. Wow. Wow. Cool, on the internet. I find voting really, really interesting topic, and a little historical reason why, which we'll talk about. And at the end, we're going to have like a little quiz about voting mostly. And I've given this presentation many times in the last, I think over 15 years now, and I've used this example, and no one has ever gotten this last question right, the hard one, until the planning county when Tony got it right. So Tony has to keep quiet. His honor was here, so he can't answer the question. Neither can anybody else that knows that one. We'll see if everybody else can get that one. It's a good one. Small boards. Robert's Rules of Order was originally written for what's called public meetings. So meetings of a large assembly of people. Think in the northeast corridor where town meetings, right, and everybody comes and gets to have their say, and they don't really have elections. I mean, anybody that shows up, it's kind of like a public forum. That's how they run some aspects of their government in the Northeast still. That's what Robert's Rules of Order was originally written for. So as you read and hear a lot of people talk about, oh, you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way. That's really only if there's like 150 people in the room. Robert's Rules of Order, chapter whatever it is in the big book there, specifically has different rules for small boards. And small boards are boards of about a dozen members or so. So you're a small board. So all sorts of these formal kinds of stuff that you may have heard Robert's Rules of Order requires are waived for small boards. For instance, the chairman can vote on a small board. Everybody says, oh, the chairman can never vote except to break a tie. And we'll talk about that. But that's not true for a small board. And I think it's routine in small boards, at least in school boards that I'm familiar with, our college board, that our chair routinely votes. Not just to break a tie, but he's got a constituency. He was elected. He needs to represent those folks, and he needs to be on the record so his folks can decide whether to reelect him or not. And so in small boards, generally, the chairman votes. And it's entirely up to the group whether that's the case, but they can vote. So some things to talk about in small boards. And then a real brief discussion about open meetings in Wyoming. I understand that Councilman Hancock is a lawyer, so we might defer to him on his understanding of the laws of Wyoming about open meetings. But particularly as an elected board, we always need to mention open meeting laws in Wyoming, because they're fairly important. So that's what we're going to talk about. And please do interrupt at any time. I hope to have some questions at the end. I hope to have questions all the way through. A nice conversation would be good.
Kyle?
You mentioned small boards.
12 members or fewer.
Okay.
Yep.
So we qualify as a small board.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. Good. The legislature does not. I'm trying to think in general in Wyoming, what is not a small board? We're pretty small. I would say about the only thing I can come up with is the legislature. As an example in government, that's not really a small board. So the three principles of Robert's Rules of Order: take up one item of business at a time. And that can get a little confusing, but in particular, I don't know how many times I've been in committee meetings and meetings where that rule is not followed, and then people get very confused. You're talking about something, and someone else says, well, you know, that's kind of like this, and you start talking about something else, and then half the membership don't know what you're talking about, and then there's a motion made, and somebody says, what are we voting for? Not a good sign that the membership is really with what's happening during the meeting. And so the first rule is one thing at a time. Now, what gets a little complicated in that is that's not one motion at a time. Okay? There's a main motion that's made, and you know, the classic example is let's spend some money on flower gardens. And somebody makes a motion to spend $1,000 on flower gardens. Okay, and you can debate that motion for a while. And then somebody says, you know, I'm in favor of flower gardens, but that's too much money. I'm going to amend that motion to be $500. So now you've got a couple motions on the floor, right? You've got the motion to spend $1,000 and the motion to amend it to $500. And the rules say that you always debate one thing at a time. And there's a stack of these motions. So if someone makes an amendment, you stop discussion on the main motion and you talk about the amendment, because you can't talk about the main motion until you resolve whether the amendment passes or not, okay? So the amendment is what's in order at that point to discuss. So stuff like that, but it's always, the key thing is making sure that everyone in the room, and particularly on the board, is aware of what it is that we're debating at this point in time. And that's where a light hand from the chair is nice. I mean, somebody wants to start talking about what kind of flowers the flower garden needs, and, you know, light hand says, no, right now we're talking about whether it's $500 or $1,000. We're not talking about the flowers anymore. We're talking just about the $500 amendment. And get that over, and then you can get to stuff. And it rarely happens, but you can amend the amendment, but you can't amend the amendment. Okay, Robert's Rules of Order does call a timeout there, okay? So you can have a motion, an amendment, and an amendment to that, but you can't go any further. At some point, it just gets way too confusing. And for Robert's Rules of Order, it's 2 amendments. An amendment of the amendment. I mean, you can have as many amendments to the main motion as you want, dealing with them one at a time. Get back to the main motion, you can amend it. Get back to the main motion, you can amend it. Courtesy, justice, impartiality, and equality. And this is an important point. I think it's the definition of a parliamentary body, if you want to be really kind of analytic about it. Everyone on this council has a single vote, and there's 7 votes on this council, correct? Mayor gets to vote. Okay. Nobody gets 2 votes. Nobody's vote counts more than somebody else's. Somebody might be louder, somebody might be quieter, somebody might be an expert, somebody might not be, but at the end of the day, when you vote, every vote is equal. That's the definition of a parliamentary body. Can you think of some examples that's not true, where some people's votes count more than others?
Stocks.
Yeah, a shareholder meeting. You own more stocks, your vote counts a lot more. Okay, not a parliamentary body. Another common example is a homeowners association. You know, there's a subdivision out there and they have a homeowners association. Maybe I own 3 lots, so I get 3 votes. Okay, not a parliamentary body. And Robert's Rules of Order is specific to parliamentary bodies only. Everyone is equal. Everyone has to be treated equality, impartial, justice, courtesy. And finally, if I was to ask a lay audience, what is the first rule you ever heard about Robert's Rules of Order, really anything, what's the first most fundamental rule? And people would say, absolutely, the first thing is the majority always rules. The majority rules. And in parliamentary procedure with Robert's Rules of Order, that's not right. There are 2 equal principles. The majority rules, but only as long as the minority rights are not violated. And that's a co-equal thing in Robert's Rules of Order. You always have to watch out for the rights of the minority before the majority can overrule. So, for example, you can't, everybody on the council is in favor of something except for one person, and they want to talk about it. And there's been no discussion. You cannot move to a vote. You have to allow at least one opposition view, if there is one, before you can vote on a motion. Always. Because that person might be an expert. And that person might have knowledge that the other 6 people don't have, and maybe they're going to convince you that, oh, that would be a terrible mistake. So, rights of the minority. Another example, closing debate. 2/3 vote to close debate, according to Robert's Rules of Order. Okay, so if the debate's going and the majority are getting impatient, say, okay, we had enough talk. It takes 2 people for every 1 person, 2 to 1, to close debate. Okay? So interesting things, usually in small boards, never really come to bear, right? I mean, you're always going to be courteous. You're going to look around. There's only 7 of you. You're all elected officials. If you got another point you want to make, the mayor's probably going to let you. I mean, I think in a really contentious meeting, sometimes I see in small boards that at some point you say, okay, guys, we've been at it for 3 hours, and it's still usually done by consensus. If one of you really wanted to speak, I think the mayor would say, okay, one more time, Kyle, one more time. But
God, you know it was me.
so
He's watched some meetings.
Yeah.
So all these kind of academic stuff are fun for people like Tony and I, but in terms of running your meetings, I think those are the most important 3 things. And fundamentally, the person running the meeting has to watch out for the rights of the minority, but the majority gets to decide. You need to be fair, courteous, and equal to all people. And you need to do one thing at a time so people are aware of what you're doing. So if you keep those in mind, that's super important. The next topic we're going to talk about is this notion of bylaws. Now, you are an elected body, part of the state. You have governmental powers as granted to you by the legislature and the Constitution of the state of Wyoming. So I wouldn't call them bylaws. I'd probably call them ordinances in your case. Okay? So any group that is joined together, they're going to have their own rules about certain things. And your own rules always take precedence over the general rules of Robert's Rules of Order. You are a really good example of a very strict hierarchy of rules. You can't violate the U.S. Constitution. I think that's the primary rule. You probably took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Wyoming. You cannot violate statutes. The legislature is the one that gave you authority, and you can't abrogate that authority when the legislature says differently. So, your lawyer, Tony, somebody might say, that's a violation of statute. You can pass that motion, but it's not in effect. Maybe I should say ordinance. You can't do that. Then your own ordinance come into bear, and only if none of the other higher, superior rule sets speak to a topic will you refer to Robert's Rules of Order. Okay, so you might have particular rules about quorums. A really good example of that in the state of Wyoming is the school board. Doesn't matter. I don't think this is true for city councils, but I know it's true for school boards. 7-member boards, you have to have 4 affirmative votes, period. So there might be 5 people there as a quorum, and 3 people vote in favor. So 3 is a majority of 5, but in the state of Wyoming, by statute, that does not pass. There has to be 4 votes in every case, at least, to pass something on a school board in the state of Wyoming. There's a statute. Now, Robert's Rules of Order would say 3 of 5 passes and 5 of 7 is a quorum, so that works. But state law in Wyoming is the superior law. Okay. What else? Let's see, meetings. So I used a couple words there. Quorum. You guys have questions about quorum? Minimum number of people in the body that have to be present before you can conduct business. Lots of bodies have higher quorum requirements. Some have lower quorum requirements. I think of the tribes, and their general council is a good example here. There's thousands of members of the tribe. What's the quorum requirement? It ain't a majority of the thousands of members, so they have a specific law in their constitution that says they have to have at least, I think, 150 members present before they can conduct business in the general council. Okay? So again, these rules are in effect, but if there wasn't a specific rule, and I don't know if there is for you or not by statute, I suspect it's the same as Robert's Rules of Order if there is. It's a majority of your membership has to be present for you to conduct business. And since you're a body of 7, that means you have to have at least 4. And I think we exercised that just today. We didn't have a quorum for a little while until Mike came in, and then we went into the meeting. And then Tim came in, so we have an absolute quorum for sure. And we conducted the business of the meeting. Meeting notice is particularly important for elected bodies. Anybody have ideas of why there's kind of strict meeting notice requirements? Of those three basic principles, which one's getting protected there?
Minority.
Rights of the minority. Okay? There might be four of you that get together secretly and have a nice little discussion about wanting to do something, and you don't really want to bring it up and ahead of time and have lots and lots of debate. Okay? So you just keep quiet and you agree you're going to do it, and then you do it, poof. And you don't even tell the other three members about the meeting. Is that fair to them? Okay? So meeting notice is fundamentally is notice amongst yourselves. Now, state of Wyoming laws also say that you're an elected body and you need to give your constituents the ability to access you. So you have other meeting notice requirements. You have to publicize your meetings in a newspaper of record probably, and you probably declare the newspaper of record every year, and so people know where to look. And if you publish your meeting notice there and they don't look, it's their fault they don't show up. That's kind of how that works. Okay? So that's meeting notice. And as a general rule, this is the difference between a regular meeting and a special meeting revolves right here on this notion of meeting notice. You probably give meeting notice once a year for all of your regular meetings. We're going to meet the first and third Wednesdays of the month at 6 o'clock in the council chambers. You pass that motion, done. Those are your regular meetings. And at a regular meeting, you can adjust your agenda and bring new topics up on the agenda at will. And I noticed that you approved your agenda, right? So somebody comes up and says, oh, I want to add something to the agenda. That's fine. It's a regular meeting. And people understand that if they want to absolutely observe everything the council does, they need to come to every regular meeting. They miss a regular meeting, that's on them. Okay? But then there's some people call them emergency meetings. The right phrase is special meetings. Something has to be decided before the next regular meeting. So you call a special meeting. You have meeting notice requirements, probably have to publicize it, and you have to list the items on the agenda for the special meeting. And I'm guessing in the state of Wyoming that you cannot entertain additional items on your agenda at a special meeting. The agenda gets published, and you're limited to that topic only. I know that that's true for what was I? I was just at that meeting. Where was that? Was at my own college board. My own college board. We had a special meeting the other day in our August meeting. And the members of the college board, and it was our August meeting, and they wanted to start discussing the preliminary discussion about the Bachelor of Applied Science degree. And the lawyer stopped them and said, nope, that's not on the agenda. This is a special meeting. You're limited to the one topic on the agenda. So that's that stuff. Questions? Are we doing okay? I'm a college professor. I can lecture all I want, but I really want to answer your questions. So interrupt for sure. This is just my little pet peeve, and since I guess I'm the guy standing at the podium, I get to talk about my pet peeves. One thing that really bugs me is when someone says, I motion that we spend $1,000 on flowers. What's the problem with that?
It's not the correct grammatical way to say something.
Where's the verb?
It doesn't exist.
Motion is a noun. Okay? So you might say, which isn't the best language, but you can get by. If you really have to use the word motion, you can say, I make a motion that we spend $1,000 on flowers. Okay, now you've got a verb and you got a sentence, and that's okay. The right way to say that is, I move. That's the verb. I move that we spend $1,000 on flowers. And then is there a second to that motion? Once somebody moves something, okay, then the noun becomes the motion of that. What motions are in order? Robert's Rules of Order has lots of discussion about this, but in general, you're following your agenda and you know what's in order. The one thing that's super important here, and I don't want to give away the secret to the hard question, but it might have something to do with this. The motion that's in order is one that changes the default action of the body. Okay? So what happens if you don't pay a bill? What if you don't authorize a bill? Can it get paid? No, right? You hold the purse strings. So the motion in order is a motion to pay the bill. It would not be a motion in order to say, I move that we don't pay the bill number 14. That's out of order. Because if you don't pass that motion, what happens? Nothing, and the bill doesn't get paid. Right? The motion has to do, some people say it's the affirmative motion, but that's not really quite right. The motion has to be something that is, that the council must do, and if they don't do it, the default action will take place. And the motion should never be the default action. That's the fundamental point. Okay? So, I imagine, I didn't see it tonight, because it's a work order meeting, I'm assuming. You probably have some list of bills that you approve every month. Tony prepares it, right? Probably on a consent agenda or something like that. You can probably ask to take something off the consent agenda, right? That's not a motion. That's just a request that I'd like to take item number 14 on the bill paying off the consent agenda because I have some discussion about it. Okay, great. And so then you pass the rest of the consent agenda, and now the chair's going to say, what about number 14? And Kyle's going to say, I don't think we should pay it. He says, well, okay, what about it? And everybody agrees it shouldn't be paid. Is there any action of the council? No. Number 14 is not going to get paid. It's never been authorized to be paid. It's not going to get paid. There's no need for Kyle to move to not pay number 14. Someone who disagrees with him says, well, Kyle, I think we should pay it. I move that we pay 14, and now we'll have a discussion. Why does that matter? Because if it's a split vote, what happens when it's a 7-member board? 4-3. Well, if Kyle's motion is to not pay the bill, and it goes 4-3, what does that mean? It means you're not going to pay the bill, so you're not going to pay the bill. Well, that's great. Well, and I guess that's okay because 3 people wanted, and that's a minority, wanted to pay the bill. But if the motion is to pay the bill, it's going to fail 3-4, and that seems much more clear to the audience, doesn't it? The motion failed to pay the bill, so we're not going to pay the bill. Okay? Something else is coming up here in a minute. Why do you have to have a second? Well, the first rule, surprise, surprise, you can do it if you want. Most people do. Robert's rules for a small board, you don't have to have a second. The group of 7 members, you do not need to require a second. So the fact that you're choosing to is certainly fine for you to do that. Maybe there's a statute requirement, maybe there's an ordinance requirement, but by Robert's rules, there's no requirement for a small board to have a second. Okay? So that gives you a hint on why does Robert's Rules of Order require it for a large board, and the answer is we don't really want one person to hijack our meetings when there's 150 people in the room. Somebody wants to keep making motions. It's like, okay, enough already. So you got to convince at least one other person. And does the person making the motion have to vote for it by Robert's rules? Yes. Does the person making the second have to vote for it? The answer is no. If you second a motion, you're indicating it's worthy of debate. That's all. If you make a motion that ultimately you get convinced that you do not want to vote for it, you should withdraw your motion. Okay? And there may be some discussion because maybe you've convinced some other people that now are in favor of it, and maybe they say, well, you can withdraw it, but I'm going to make the motion. And that's all allowed.
John, do you have to poll your second if you vote negative before the vote's taken?
Well, technically, you can't vote against your own motion, but yes, so part of that discussion would be, you know what, I'm going to withdraw the motion. Does the second agree? Because the second can say they don't agree. And what that usually means and this stuff never really happens, okay? I mean, we'll be real clear here, right? I mean, it's a small board. You guys aren't going to face this. But if you did, and I was running that meeting, I would ask the second, the maker of the motion is withdrawing the motion. Will you move the motion? And if they move the motion, then off you go again.
But if the second chooses to not support the vote that they've seconded, they need to remove that before they vote against it?
No. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. Very good. Right. It's only worthy of debate. That's what the second means. It's worthy for the council to spend some time talking about this. Right. And there's going to be lots of stuff that it's not worth your time. So don't second that motion. Don't second it. let it die for lack of a second because it's not worth your time. That's what dying for lack of a second does. Good. Okay. Voting.
Your Honor.
Yes, Kyle?
When you said that you don't really need a second on a small board,
Right.
okay, but we have had a second since,
Forever.
for a long time,
Forever.
yeah. And
And we may, the answer to that, Kyle, may be, I hate to interrupt you, but are we statutorily required by our rules?
I wanted that comment.
That, I was just asking Kristen, we may be statutorily required to have a second.
That's what I was saying.
You say no?
I don't know that answer. I'd have to look it
I've
up.
actually been looking it up since he brought it up because I was just curious.
Yeah.
In case anyone thinks I'm texting, this is all I have.
Oh, I know what you're doing because you're knocking me off the record.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you see anything in statute?
I'm working on it. Right now, I'm in our ordinances, just curious, because I know that we specifically adopted, in terms of when we do business, that it's with Robert's Rules of Order, and I'm just trying to find where that is to see if there's a specific need for a second.
Councilman Bailey?
So to me, I guess, I think it's a good idea that we have a second in place, because if we can't get two people to agree even that we should talk about it, it's probably not worth talking about.
That's what I was
And I guess, so we could make that in our own rules,
You could, and
that we want to have a second, because that saves us from discussing something nobody wants to talk about.
it's not a problem until someone creates it a problem. Okay? So there's lots of practices of bodies that aren't formal, and as long as everybody adheres to the practice, there's no harm. But, if something died for lack of a second, and the person making that motion wants to say, well, actually, by Robert's Rules of Order, for a small board, you don't require a second. Well, okay, that'll prolong the debate for another 5 minutes, and then you'll take the vote, and then it'll go down 6-1. I mean, so it's not a problem until it's a problem. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but if you want to be exactly correct to Robert's Rules of Order, you would want to adopt an ordinance or I don't know exactly the language for a council, some rule for yourselves that says, we don't require a second, but Robert's Rules doesn't require a second, but we do. We adhere to all other rules for a small board, except we will require a second for a motion. Something like that.
In case anyone is curious, I guess, because I looked this up earlier. In terms of what is a quorum, we don't have any wiggle room with that. It's got to be a majority of all the qualified members. So I've discovered that so far.
Oh, now, that's really interesting. Notice the language there. That's not 4 of 7. Now, why do I say that? Because what happens if you have two, it's a majority of the qualified members. So what happens if you have 2 vacant seats?
And you'd have 3 would be sufficient.
And 3 of 5 is sufficient for a quorum.
And we have that occasionally. We live with that occasionally. When we have an open seat, somebody's resigned until we put somebody else on.
Yeah, exactly. And, for a 7-member board, when there's 1 vacancy, the quorum's not going to change, because now you have 6, and a majority of 6 is not 3. You got to have more than half, so you're still at 4. You're going to have 2 vacancies before your quorum will drop down to 3. Exactly. Okay. And actually, we're on that slide right now. There's 3 areas of that, just what we're talking about. Is it a majority of those present? For you, it's not. Well, for the quorum. For deciding, start again, the quorum is whether you can conduct business. Okay? And it's a majority of 7 if all seats are occupied. If not, it's a majority of the occupied seats. Okay. Now, at the meeting that you have a quorum at, what is the majority that passes a motion? And there's 3 different ways to require a majority here. The first, which is what I think you do, is a majority of those present. Okay? So right now, there's 5 of you present. If you made a motion, 3 of you could pass it, correct? Mm-hmm. Right? 5 is the required quorum, so you can conduct business. Right. And 3 of you of the 5 is a majority, more than half of the 5 present at that meeting, and that would pass. Okay? That's standard Robert's Rules of Order. If there's not any other requirement anywhere else, a majority of the membership is the quorum, and the majority of the present is the passage of a motion. Okay? But there's 2 other areas. One is the entire membership. That's the quorum requirement that Tim just mentioned to you. You have to have a majority of the membership, meaning the occupied seats. Some bodies will say you have to have a majority of the membership to pass something. And so in this case, 3 wouldn't have worked. If you had that rule, you'd have to get a 4th person to vote for it because there's 7 occupied seats. 2 people just happen not to be here. That's the school board requirement that we were talking about. Okay, you've got to have 4 people. So if you were a school board, 3 doesn't pass it in tonight. Okay? And that's because Wyoming state statute takes precedent over Robert's Rules of Order. Robert's Rules of Order is on the bottom. You've got to follow the statute. The statute says for Wyoming public K-12 school districts, a majority of the board, not a majority of the board present. Okay? And then the other is of the fixed membership. And this says that no matter what, if there's vacancies or not, there's 7 fixed membership. So if there's 2 vacancies and the quorum is, if the membership is 5, and so the quorum, you say, okay, well, we can get by with 3, because 3 is a majority of 5, because there's 2 vacancies. If it's fixed membership, that means fixed at 7. You think about, like, all of you on a bus and you all get hit by a bus and there's only 3 of you alive. You can never call a meeting if that's the requirement. You can never get a quorum of a meeting because 4 of you are dead. So that's a very difficult membership requirement and almost never there. The only place I've ever seen kind of fixed membership requirements are in really strict kind of legal documents, partnership documents of multiple bodies where people don't die. So it's like an MOU between a school board, a city, a college, and somebody else. There has to, so the membership is a representative from each of those bodies, right? So it's like somebody dies, the president dies, well, but they can still have a membership. They can still have a representative there. And so you might require all the membership to be present.
John, a fixed membership, would that be the tribal requirement where they have 150 votes for people required to be there?
Yes.
So they could vote?
Yes. Another good example. Or there's a fixed requirement for the quorum. Right. Okay. I think, I don't know, because, you know, you can't really, I'm not a tribal member, so I've never attended a true general council, but my understanding is that once the quorum's been met, the majority to pass a motion is a simple majority of those present. So if there's 175 people there, you need more than half of 175. Yeah. Okay. Can the chair vote? I've already gave you that away. The answer is not to break a tie. That's never the answer. Even in a large board, that's never the answer. The answer is the chair in a large board should not vote unless their vote changes the outcome. Okay? If their vote changes the outcome of something, then they should vote, or can vote, is the right way to say that. But remember, for a small board, that's not even, you can vote anyway. Okay? So what does that mean? Let's assume for a minute that you're a body not of 7, but of 70. So now we're definitely a large board, so the chair shouldn't vote. Okay. 70 people present, 70 people in membership, normal quorum. I have to do a little bit of math in my head here. So let's say one person's absent, so it's 69. And so the vote is 34-34. So it's a tie vote, and the chair is the 69th vote. Should the chair vote?
Yes.
If the chair doesn't want it to pass, you should not vote because it fails on a tie, 34-34. Okay? But if you are in favor of it passing, then you can vote and make it 35-34 and pass it. Okay? So it depends. Vote only if your vote makes a difference. If you don't vote, it dies anyway and you're against it, so you don't need to vote. And it can be the opposite in terms of the numbers here. What if it's 33-34? That's a bad example, because if you vote in favor, that won't work. If you're in favor, let's see. What if the vote is 33 in favor and 34 against? And you're against it.
Then you vote.
Then you vote no, so you force a tie and it fails. 34-34, exactly. If you're in favor of it, don't need to vote because it's going to pass anyway, 34-33. That's the example. Okay? So the chair should only vote if it matters, and on your board, your chair should always vote. And I believe, and this isn't anywhere in Robert's Rules of Order, this is just John proselytizing here, that you guys are elected from specific districts, correct? And the mayor is elected as a whole. Okay? I think the people of Riverton expect you to vote. Okay? They want to know your record, so they know whether they're going to vote for you on re-election or not. And so if the mayor never votes, because it's rare that it's a tight vote, and so the mayor just never votes, I mean, what are we supposed to vote for you? On what basis do we look at your record? So I really think in all small boards that are elected membership, I believe you have an obligation to vote. You have to maintain a record that you can stand on at the next election. But that's just me. Okay, abstentions. What happens when somebody needs to abstain? Okay, this goes back to what's the definition of a majority. So Kyle's wife is applied for a job, and I don't know whether you have to approve jobs, but we'll say that you have to approve every hire. And Kyle's not going to vote. So I can't vote against my wife.
I can't vote for her.
Right? But you probably really can't vote against her. So you're just going to abstain, right? So now the question is, what does it take to pass that motion? Is an abstention a no vote? It's not a vote of no. So we got to be, the language gets really tricky here. If you abstain, you are not voting no. You're just not voting. Okay? So now what happens? Robert's Rules of Order, again, says that if Kyle comes to the meeting, he counts in the quorum count. Okay, so there's 5 members here. So you've got a quorum to conduct business. That's fine. Now there's a motion that we're going to hire Kyle's wife. He's going to abstain. What does it take to pass that motion? Because it's going to go 2-2. Does it pass? No, it's tied. Nothing ever passes. It's got to be 3-2. And with 5, that's okay. Because 5, whether Kyle votes or not, 3 is a majority of 5. Okay? But what happens if you're her daughter? So now we essentially have 2 vacancies in the vote, right? Okay, so we have a quorum, but now there's only 3 people voting. It's 2-1 to hire. Does that pass? By Robert's Rules of Order, it does. Because it's a majority of those present and voting is the default. You're not voting. A majority of those present and voting, there are 3 of you present and voting, and 2 of you as a majority of 3, so it passes. Or does the statute require that a majority of people present? Well, you are present, you're just not voting. So now it fails on the 2-1 vote because 2 is not a majority of the 5 people present. So got to be a little careful about that. Again, most of the times these situations never come up. For you, I would be really surprised if you have any specific laws in effect on any of these things. So if you're following Robert's Rules of Order, you would hire her. 2-1 works. You count for the quorum count, you choose not to vote, and it's a majority of present and voting passes. Okay? And same thing, so this is interesting. If it's a majority of the membership or the fixed membership, then an abstention is the equivalent of a no vote, isn't it? Whether you actually vote or not doesn't matter. So think of a Wyoming school board. It takes 4 affirmative votes out of 7. You have to get 4 votes. So if you abstain, you're not one of the 4. If you vote no, you're not one of the 4. It's the same thing. So it's nice to abstain in the school board because you have some conflict, but you are voting no. It's the same thing as voting no. I do this a lot when I'm running meetings. I don't take formal votes on routine matters that are always going to pass unanimously. Minutes. All those in favor of the minutes say aye. Everybody says yay. Those opposed nay. Nobody says anything, blah, blah, blah. I use this phrase without objection a lot when I'm running a meeting. So I'll look at my membership and say, the motion is to approve the minutes. Is there any objection? Without objection, the minutes are approved, and I move on. Okay? That's perfectly fine in Robert's Rules of Order. If there's an objection, then you take a formal vote, of course. Okay? Unanimous consent is another phrasing for that.
So John, if we put that into our terms, if we're doing a dog license and we're all in, we can do that right?
You can do that for any motion, as long as you're comfortable that the question here is protecting the rights of the minority, okay? Which may be the majority and you're just wrong, by the way, okay? Are the people, can they object? Are they comfortable enough in the meeting to say, you know what, no, I object? If you feel like they'll do that, that's great. But, you know, people that can't object probably don't get elected to these kinds of positions, so I wouldn't worry about it. And people that can't object probably can't vote no either. So I wouldn't worry about it. So I use it a lot, but I'm kind of an SOB. I'm not real sensitive to people that can't stand up to me. I don't know what that means when we're running a meeting like this, right? I mean, is it hard to say, no, wait, I object. I want to have a vote. And, you know, people might object just because they want it on the record, too. You'll often get people asking for a roll call vote on something because they specifically want people's names associated to how they vote. And that's common. So you could object on that basis, too. So you can do it on any motion. I don't do it. I do it on just the routine consent agenda, which is usually things like minutes and that kind of stuff. You know, another one that I did observe tonight that I would probably have used it was the excusing non-present members. I think, right? Is that anybody going to vote against excusing your membership?
Perhaps.
Well, then you'd object and say, nope, I want to vote. Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't vote against that if it was just one at a time, but if somebody was chronically,
Exactly.
I was thinking.
that's when you would,
At some point, you might do it without objection for a while, and then at some point, one of your members gets fed up and says, no, I object.
take a vote.
John Wood has missed the last 4 straight meetings. We need to discuss this elephant in the room.
Right.
It
Tim?
actually makes a difference with Wyoming statute. That would make you ineligible. You could have a vacancy declared if you
Right.
miss 4 meetings and you're not.
Excuse.
There'd have to be unexcused absences for 4 meetings. So it's not just we treat it like it's just something we do practically without thought, but
Is there a time frame in 4 meetings? Is it in your term?
I think it's got to be in a
your
term,
year,
just in a term.
or
But it's got to be 4 consecutive.
or consecutive?
And laws like that are often put in play because somebody has a terminal illness or they've got hit by the bus or whatever, they're in the hospital, okay? And everybody feels terrible for them, but they've missed 4 meetings in a row. Are their constituents being represented on the council? And at some point, somebody just has to be the bad person. Say, I'm so sorry you got hit by the bus, but we're going to declare a vacancy because you can't come to our meeting. So it's really nice to have that statute.
Well, and another interesting thought about it too is actually if you had people that were trying to block a vote by not showing up, by making it so there's not a quorum,
Yeah.
our ordinance actually provides we could send Chief Murphy after him. And you don't have to have a majority to do an action like that. And that's per state statute as well. So if we had people that were trying to block things and we wanted to have direction to Chief Murphy to go get them, we could do that without a majority or a quorum.
And I know of 2 cases in the recent past, the last few years, where that's been the case in state legislatures. Just this most recent term, Oregon had a problem where the Democrats fled out of state, right? You read about that?
Yeah,
And why'd they go out of state? Because the state police don't have jurisdiction in Washington,
and come get them.
right? So they couldn't come get them. And another case a few years earlier in Illinois.
John, I have to apologize. I'm going to leave, but I'll turn the meeting over to Councilman Bailey.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Oh, good, thank you.
Hey, Mayor.
Okay, so I think we've talked about the small board stuff. The other thing, debate rules are relaxed. So remember that Robert's Rules of Order are written for big boards, big rooms full of people. So there are some pretty strict debate rules. Somebody makes the motion, is seconded, they're supposed to speak in favor of the motion, and then the debate rules say you alternate, and there's supposed to be two separate areas. People oppose the motion line up over here, people for the motion line up over here, and the chair goes opposed, next in favor, next opposed. You're supposed to alternate back and forth, yada, yada, yada. Small board, all those rules are relaxed. Okay? And the second, not required, but it can be done. Open meeting laws in Wyoming. Do you guys you call them executive sessions when you close out public? There are 7 reasons in Wyoming statute on why you can do an executive meeting, and only 7. Our lawyer at the college has said that there needs to be a public vote taken to move into executive session. That public vote can take place the prior meeting. So it's really nice if you're going to do your executive sessions, you're going to go into executive session at 6 o'clock, you're going to rule yourself in order at 7. You can publicize that out, and nobody needs to show up till 7. They don't need to sit here for an hour while you go somewhere else. So you can do that motion and say, at the start of the next meeting, I move that we go into executive session. That's a nice thing. So the first is that there needs to be a public vote to do that. And the second that our lawyer requires is, for what statutory purpose are you going into executive session? And you say that publicly in the motion. So personnel, legal, conferring with your lawyer, because it's privileged communication, real estate are the 3 that I come up at the top of my head. There's 4 more, and I honestly don't know what they are. Anybody know what they are? I could look them up, but I don't know what they are.
You said potential litigation,
Yep, legal.
transactions, personnel.
That's all we use it for.
That's all we really use them for.
Yep. And it's pretty clear, you don't want to talk about performance evaluation in public. You don't want to talk about buying the store down the street, because you may or may not, but if it's a public meeting, all of a sudden the price for the store down the street goes up because you're interested in buying it. So that kind of stuff can be secret. And your discussions with your attorney are privileged by law. So you don't want to talk about litigation strategy where your opponents can listen to. Okay. Recent changes. Talk to your lawyer about this. It wasn't this legislative session, but it was the last one, I believe, that executive meetings changed. You, at least my board, the college, are required to take minutes in an executive session. Those are notes. They need to be written notes. And they get filed in a special place that no one has access to. If someone wants to compel you, they think you've done something, some violation of the public meetings law. You discuss something you're not supposed to discuss. Okay? They can go to district court, and the district court can require only the judge read your notes. And if the judge reading your notes says that you violated the law, then the judge can release the notes or not. That's a new statute requirement on the last 2 or 3 sessions.
Kyle?
So that means if we discussed the 8th one, not the 7, but we discussed the 8th, whatever that is.
Yep.
So then somehow it got out. I don't want to use the word leaked. And so the judge then could order the person that has the secret notes,
Correct?
because we get what do you call it? We get a little summary of what we talked about. We sign it, we hand it back to the person that keeps those secret notes, and the responsible party has those.
Yes.
But so if we discuss 1 of 7, we're okay. But if it's outside of those 7, then we're in jeopardy.
You're in jeopardy.
Okay.
And if the judge rules that you're in jeopardy, they can release the notes, and you may be in violation of law and have some liability to that as well. I had an executive session, well, I wasn't in it, it was a school board, where the chair came out and they were deciding who to hire. And the chair came out and said in open session, in executive session, we decided to hire John Wood. That's really bad. Okay, you can discuss in executive session who to hire, but you can't vote in executive session, and you can't decide in executive session. You got to come out and you have to vote to hire John Wood. Now, what typically happens, we just had this in our board, and this is extremely typical. We had a vacancy in our board, in the Lander School Board, and there's discussion in executive session. They figure out who they're going to do. They come out, and it's always unanimous, so that there's no question about it, right? So there's not an agreement, it's just kind of the way it works, is that somebody comes out, moves to fill a vacancy with John Wood, there's a second, and there's a unanimous vote. That's very typical. But I also know that the executive session took 4 hours, and I'm pretty sure that they didn't discuss the same guy for 4 hours and what a great job he'd do. There must have been some contention, but it came out unanimous, and that's very typical in executive session kind of stuff.
Tony, did you have a comment?
So to be clear, for clarity for everybody here, if we go into executive session, say we go for personnel or any of the items, but then all of a sudden we begin to talk about the dog leash ordinance, which is a public item, you cannot do that. Nor can we speak about, if we go in for personnel, we cannot discuss pending litigation. Because unless you call it, unless you denote why you're going into that.
And that I'm less sure about, because our lawyer has advised my college board that in the motion always say the reason, okay? But if you go into a legit reason that's not in the call of the motion, I don't know whether that's legal or not. I would suspect it
Yes,
is.
that would be something I would like to get clarification on, because I guess, to me, you're letting the cat out of the bag a little bit if you say we're going to go in to discuss legal liability, or we're going to discuss real estate, or we're going to discuss personnel. You're almost better off, in my opinion, to say, here's the reasons that we can go into executive session. We go, come back, then if there's no action taken.
Yeah.
Your Honor, Councilman.
When we go in, that is read, the open, why we're going into executive session. We read each one of those 7.
Not always.
Not, well,
No, Your Honor, if I may, I had this question come up about 4 years ago, and the attorney at that point denoted that anytime you go into executive session, you denote the general reason and read the statute. It is good practice to read the statute of why you're going into. So we are going to discuss personnel and pending litigation. Those are the 2 reasons you go into. Those are the 2 things you talk about. That is my understanding.
yeah.
Okay.
And it is state statute, Wyoming State Statute 15-1105.
And that's decided.
You have to tell the reason why you're going into executive.
That is our understanding, yes.
Okay.
Very good. Yep, good questions.
Thank you.
Sorry that I didn't know the answer, but I'm glad we figured it out. So here's some quick scenarios. So 27-member board. They're all present. And the vote's 13-13. What should the chair do?
Your Honor, I was thinking what you're saying, because I'm learning a lot, but and with the 27-member board, that'd be a large board,
Very good.
so they would choose to vote depending on what they want. So they can vote or not vote, depending on where that vote's going to take them to, whatever they decide.
Correct. So since it's tied 13-13, the chair should vote if she's in favor of it and should not vote if she's not. Correct.
It dies on with her, or it lives with her.
Yes. And perfect on the 27-member board. That's the little subtlety, right? Now you're on a big board, because it's about a dozen members, is the qualification on the small board exception. Yep, good. Okay, 7-member board, all present, the vote's 3-3. What does the chair do?
And using the same logic, the chair would vote the direction that they would want it to go, which means they could vote against.
Yes.
Have it fail.
And what is routine here is that now this is a small board, right? And so it's very common, regardless of how the chair votes, that the chair would vote anyway. So the chair's going to vote 4-3 and it's going to pass. The chair's going to vote 3-4, it's not going to pass. So if it's not going to pass 3-3, if it's a large board, the chair should not vote because it doesn't change the outcome. But in a small board, probably should. It builds the record, right? I mean, it's a small board.
Right.
So, scenario, oh, this one's interesting. This is an actual case that actually happened at CWC. It takes 2/3 vote of the membership is the requirement. So this is Professor Emeritus to be named Professor Emeritus at Central Wyoming College. 2/3 vote of the faculty is what the board policy says. So it's of the membership, okay? Not who happens to vote that day by the faculty. The faculty had 50 members. And I did a little bit of math for you there. 33 and 1/3 is 2/3 of 50, right? So 2/3 vote of the faculty, and there were 50 faculty members, means that you have to have 33 and 1/3 votes to have 2/3 vote of the faculty. Of course, there were 33 votes.
So,
There were 10 voted no, and 7 did not vote.
does not pass.
Correct, right? Because it says vote of the faculty. If it said a 2/3 vote of the faculty present and voting,
Would have passed.
then it'd be fine, because what, only 43 voted, and 33 is definitely 2/3 of 43. But 33 is not 2/3 of 50, exactly right. So I tried to explain that to my faculty, because I was the president of the faculty at this time, and someone rose to a parliamentary point of order and said, no, John, the requirement gets rounded down. So since it's 33 1/3, it's 33 votes. And he was a math professor. And he convinced the majority of the faculty, and on the point of order, I was overruled, and so I had to go stand in front of my board and tell them that 33, according to the faculty of the college, 33 votes was 2/3 vote of the faculty. And I'll never forget this. You guys probably know Dennis Christensen, longtime board member, he's the board chair at that time. He turned to Judge Roberts, who's now Judge Roberts. Wes Roberts was the college attorney. He said, Wes, is 33 2/3 of 50? And Wes goes, no, it's not, Mr. Chair. And he says, well, John, you're out of order. Bang. And they moved on. And I was grossly embarrassed, because sometimes you have to represent things you don't really believe in. You guys are probably used to that. So the answer is no, it does not pass. This is the tough one. So Tony can't say anything. Okay. So the contract with the vendor says it will automatically renew every year unless they're told by March 1st that the organization does not want to renew. Okay? State statute says all actions of the school board require a majority board, like we talked about. In the last meeting before March 1st, so they're not going to meet again, so this is the last chance. 5 of the 7 members are present. The motion is to renew the contract another year, and the vote is 3 yes and 2 no. Is the contract renewed? You can.
No,
Why not?
because the majority of the board would have been 4, and only 3 voted yes?
Correct. So the motion does not pass, right?
Correct.
So the contract is not renewed. Nope, the contract gets renewed.
Motion is to renew the,
Because the contract says it renews unless they choose to not
Correct.
choose it.
The chair made a fatal error here. The motion itself is out of order. It's not the positive action of the board. The motion has to be to deny the contract, because if that school board did nothing, the contract renews. So making a motion to renew the contract is the problem here. The motion needed to be, I move to deny the contract. And now the 5 people would vote 2 to 3 to deny the contract, and it clearly fails. And so, okay, the motion to deny the contract clearly fails, the contract gets renewed, and everybody goes home knowing that the contract gets renewed. Now, the sad news is, this was not a contract with the vendor. This was a principal's contract for renewal of hire. And the state statute says that you have to notify your administration by March 1st if you're not going to renew their contract. That's what happened here at this school board meeting. And what happened is nobody challenged it, and the administrator wasn't rehired. But he could have. And at the end of that meeting, I went and talked to that administrator and said, if you want to push this, you could push this. And he said, no, the board voted against me. I said, no, the board voted not to renew your contract, and that motion failed. Therefore, your contract is renewed because it's automatically renewed. Okay? So, but he chose not to push it. So this is just an example that even in little Wyoming, in a little school district, all the stuff we've talked about, one time in my life, it actually made a difference. One time. What's a majority? Majority of what? What's the law? Superior law, minor law, the motion, what's in order, what's not in order? All that stuff came to bear in this one case. And believe it or not, your city administrator got that right. Isn't that amazing? He's a pretty smart guy.
We knew he was smart, that's why we hired him.
Are you trying to take credit for his smarts? I
No,
think that's good. That's what we should do, right?
You don't have to be smart, you just have to hire smart people.
Right.
Yep. So that's all my presentation, and I had no idea that we were going to go a little over an hour. But I'm happy to answer more questions, and I appreciated the questions you did ask, so.
does anybody have any other questions?
I don't have a question.
Yes,
I have a,
Tim?
I looked this up. I don't see anything in state statute or in our ordinance that requires a second. Just basically says we follow Robert's Rules of Order, so. Not that it makes a difference. I think generally speaking, we've done it. I think it's a good practice, but, and this is something that I did not know. You were talking about school boards and passage of, I guess not an ordinance, but a decision that they would make. This is Wyoming Statute 15.1.115. Let's see where it is. Passage of an ordinance requires the affirmative vote of the majority of the qualified members of the governing body. So it's the same as a school board.
Right.
So if there's a vacancy, so that's interesting.
That's for a city ordinance?
Yeah?
School board, he said.
No. This is for city. We've not operated
Said
this way.
school board.
But no, this is the same for a city, 15.1.115. So anyway, passage of an ordinance requires affirmative vote of the majority of the qualified members. So it's not the majority of the people there.
So that's just to pass an ordinance, though.
That's an ordinance. Now, other business doesn't require
Other
that.
business would just require a.
Interesting, okay.
Okay.
Very good, so,
And
yeah,
also in your scenario, because that was a school board, should have been should have had to have 4 votes to pass.
correct.
So then it still failed.
Right. That's what I was.
Right, but the motion to, what was the motion?
Motion was not to hire.
Let's go back to the scenario here. Now I want to go back to.
To approve it, right?
There's the scenario. The motion was to renew the contract,
But that it automatically renewed
correct?
if there was not a motion to not hire.
Correct. So here, you're right, the motion fails, okay, because it's not 4-2.
Right.
So what does it mean that the motion to renew the contract failed? Because that's what happened. And we said, oh, doggone it, Mr. X, you didn't get the 4 votes you needed. He went home assuming he was fired.
Right.
Was he fired?
Because
No.
the motion did not change the consequence of what was going to happen.
Did the school board take action? When you defeat a motion, have you taken action? The answer is no. You have to pass something to take action. And so fundamentally, right, the conflict here is that the guy went home thinking he didn't get 4 votes on the motion, and so he wasn't renewed, when it was the motion that was out of order in the first place.
Your Honor, just one thing. I would have loved to see that guy go to court and win. The reason why we have so much turnover is because of the politics in certain areas. And the families of those certain areas get disjointed. And the school teacher could have been the most brilliant, but he didn't follow the proper understanding of that group. And I don't like that. You know,
Yep.
Joe Clark is a classic example of trying for excellence. And yet they thwarted him because he was not popular, because he didn't pat the right person on the right head.
I don't know Joe Clark.
Uh,
Doesn't matter.
Well, it's a classic movie about a black man who is trying to straighten out a school district which has gone into the ditch.
Got it. So I'm pretty good about my notes here, so I do want to go back to the question about seconds here. My notes say that the rules for small boards is a second is not required, but can be. So the fact that you are choosing to require a second, I think, is fine. Now, we can go look that up specifically in Robert's Rules for a small board and see exactly what the wording is, but I'm pretty good usually in my notes there, so I'm guessing that's the case. Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. I sometimes, again, rarely do we get into a situation that we have to really get down to the nitty-gritty of this, but I think it's handy for everybody to know, and I think it makes the meetings run a lot more efficient by using this system.
It's an even playing field. It tells us the rules before we do.
Thank you for presenting to us. and
Thank you for having me.
appreciate your time. And is there any more business that needs to be brought before the board?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
I move we adjourn.
Then do we have any objection to adjourning? Okay, seeing none, the meeting is adjourned.
A+.